Native Spanish teachers should be the best at teaching Spanish, right? Wrong. Here's why being a native Spanish speaker doesn't always make you a good teacher. If you don't know me, my name is Hamid, I'm 15 years old, and I became a polyglot at 13 years old after getting fluent in Spanish in about 5 days of straight studying, so 120 hours exactly. And in that time, I studied for a period of a few months, and mainly focusing on studying during the summer of 2022. Here's how I sounded before that summer.
Hola, estoy comiendo comida. Voy a mejorar mi español.
Y ahora puedo hablar español con fluidez, puedo tener conversaciones con los activos y creo que mi acento es bien desarrollado, o sea, parece más o menos como nativo. O sea, los nativos me han dicho antes que mi acento suena como un acento nativo, pero yo creo que tengo que mejorar unas cosas, pero bueno. Have you ever had a native Spanish teacher that just didn't help you progress in Spanish? In this video, I'm going to explain why that happens and actually what to do about it. So if you don't know, I was born and raised in Sweden. And in Sweden, when you reach 6th grade, you have to choose between French or Spanish as like your third language to learn. Which essentially just means that, like, at least in Sweden, you study Swedish and English at school. And then you choose a third language when you reach 6th grade. So I chose Spanish, like pretty much everyone else. And after about a year in, so 7th grade, between that period, I did not learn that much. And obviously our teachers were native Spanish teachers. They were obviously from Spain and they were teaching us, that Spanish, the Spanish from Spain. And we did the basic things, like you make a presentation. The Spanish in school is not supposed to actually teach you Spanish, like actually teach you it. It's more so to, like, just to be able to know a few words here and there, right? So that's what they taught us. We went through like vocabulary, numbers, the time and stuff like that. And that was until one of my friends in my class started using Duolingo in his free time. And that sort of like started a trend in 7th grade that, like, where everyone in the class was like studying either French or Spanish in their free time on Duolingo, and most people use Duolingo. And that was all because of him, because he sort of like, his Spanish improved slightly from doing it, and he got like Duolingo Plus and all that. So naturally the rest of us wanted to also follow. And so I took it upon me to do research on all the different apps and different like fast methods of learning, just so I could be better, because I'm just very competitive. I wanted to be the best, of course. And so eventually I found this YouTuber named Ikenna, and he's like a very big language YouTuber who like speaks in like 9 languages fluently. And he made a tier list video of all the different apps for language learning. And he put Duolingo pretty low, and he put 2 apps in S tier. First one was called Pimsleur, and the second one was called Language Transfer. Now I checked out both. Pimsleur and Language Transfer are both extremely similar in terms of their concept. You just listen to a lesson pretty much, and then you follow along. So if they tell you, how do you say this, you'd pause and then you'd answer. And so both of them were in S tier. So I checked out Pimsleur, and they had a 30-minute free lesson. And I also showed my friend, and my friend did some of Pimsleur, and I also tried it. And we didn't really like it that much. It was also paid, so we had to pay for the rest of the course, and we didn't have any money. At this point, I was like 12, and I was about to turn 13. And then we checked out Language Transfer, and the great thing was Language Transfer was free, and it followed the same method of like listening to the thing. So I did like 10 lessons of Language Transfer, and it like blew my mind directly. And the reason why was because essentially he was explaining grammar. He was going through the entire grammar of Spanish, which is the entire course. But the way he did it was he would explain why certain things happen in Spanish, and that just made it so much easier for me than Duolingo, where you have to essentially just memorize what happens, you know what I mean? And so I told my friend about it, and then we got so obsessed over Language Transfer that we made it our goal to get fluent in Spanish in the summer of 2022. And so I finished the Language Transfer course before that summer, and my friend didn't really finish it. He finished like half, and then when summer started, he just decided he's not gonna do it, which is kind of sad. So I was left on my own. Now, during that summer, I also repeated the Language Transfer course twice to sort of review what I'd missed, if I had missed anything. And it was really interesting to me that the teacher in Language Transfer, the way it works is the teacher teaching a student, and you're sort of like watching them or listening to them, and then you're supposed to answer as though you were the student, and then you listen to what the student actually says. But the great thing was that the teacher explained that the teacher himself is actually not a native Spanish speaker. The teacher is just a random linguist, like he's a polyglot who just like learns different languages. And so he would explain like his personal struggles with certain things in Spanish. For example, he explained one time he had a hard time pronouncing the double R, like the rolling R, like in arroz. He said that he struggled with that, and he sort of explained that to the student. And what was interesting is that after that point, during the summer, I apart from language transfer, I discovered other YouTubers and I took the concepts of how they got fluent, because they got fluent in like 20 days or 44 days. And I sort of took the main concepts of how they got fluent and created 2 exercises which I focused on intensely during that time. And then by the end of that summer, I was able to have like a fluent conversation with native speaker. And my Spanish was not perfect. I was not able to speak fast, but I was conversationally fluent. I was able to hold a conversation for over an hour with a native speaker, and I didn't know 1,000 words, yes, and I didn't even know every single word either. Like, I was still able to have the conversation. Now, I got conversationally fluent in about 120 hours of studying, and I searched it up. It actually takes around about like 600 hours of studying to reach that conversational level. But what was very interesting to me is that I reached it like 3 times faster or 4 times faster than the average person. And it was very interesting that the regular way of learning includes native Spanish teachers, whereas the way I learned was through someone who had actually learned Spanish himself. And then it just sort of clicked in my brain. And this is what I want to explain to you in this video. A Spanish teacher has to have learned Spanish, right? If you're a Spanish teacher, if you're teaching Spanish, you have to have learnt it. But native speakers have not actively learned Spanish. Therefore, they aren't as good at teaching. Because teaching is teaching someone how to learn it. But if you didn't learn it, if you didn't, like, you don't know how you learn Spanish, right? Or your native language. Like, I don't know how I learned English. I just listened to it, okay? I just grew up watching English shows, right? And speaking English with my siblings and stuff. The same thing applies to a native Spanish speaker. Most native Spanish speakers, like, especially if they studied Spanish as well, if they already knew Spanish but then they studied it, the problem is they can't explain the why. And this is what made language transfer good that most Spanish teachers don't do. Let me explain with another story. So 2 years after I did get conversationally fluent, like past the summer, I didn't really study at all, almost. I just went on like a 30-minute call every week on like Hello Talk with some random people, just to maintain my Spanish. And then by the time I created this channel and started making videos about Spanish, I took the concepts that I took from the YouTubers that, you know, got fluent very quickly, and I sort of made them into their own frameworks and methods, which I could teach out in a comprehensible way. And eventually I started doing coaching, and one of my clients one time, we were going through I think, por versus para, the difference between por and para, and in my explanation, by the way, I explained that like the native Spanish teachers have been lying to you and that they've been not helping you. And he had other teachers that were teaching him Spanish, but they were native speakers. I'll put the audio here, but by the end of it, he was like, I have teachers that have told me to memorize like a long list of differences between por and para.
Well, necesito tiempo para descansar. Yeah, that's so crazy. Like, this whole time learning Spanish, it's been so confusing, but yeah, it's the way you're putting it is yeah, it makes sense. I'm getting it now. And it's not like I gotta write it all down and memorize it. Like, I get it. So okay, let me say this. Let me say this though. A lot of my tutors are natives, and I'm starting to realize, because they are a native speaker in a Spanish speaking country, the way they teach Spanish is trying to mimic how they learned English. And it's now, I'm realizing now, it's confusing, respectively. This way is just way better. Yeah, honestly, my mind is a little blown right now, just like.
And that just sort of surprised me, because there is literally a simple way to think about por and para. And that is the way that native speakers didn't learn, because native speakers just knew it. They grew up memorizing it. When you memorize it though, you don't understand the why. You don't understand why that happened. My framework for teaching grammar, I have a Spanish fundamentals course where I just go through the entire grammar and explain every single rule. The framework for grammar in Spanish is just 3 W's. I just call it the 3 W's. And the 3 W's are what, where, and why. Now, Spanish sentences fundamentally are what and where. So what are the words or what are the verbs, right? And then it's just where they're placed. Language by definition is just that. So I eat is como. And then what is it? Lo. So now we have como and we have lo. This is the what. Then we have the where. Where is como and lo placed? What is the order? And the order here would be lo como. I'm eating it or I eat it. Now, most people stop there, and this is the key difference. That is where native speakers stop. They just tell you, hey, this is it. But they miss out on the most important W. The most important W is the why. Why does the lo come before the como? Why is it como? Right? The problem with natives is that they just know it because they've memorized it, because they have been immersed in that environment. And that is good. That is how you're supposed to learn. In fact, the method I use to learning Spanish is literally that. It's just an immersion in Spanish, just online, of course. But the problem there comes when it comes to explaining it. Just like how you and me, as native English speakers, you probably couldn't explain a grammar rule in English. You probably can't explain why it's an apple and not a apple. Or you probably can't explain why certain past tenses happen. Or even in Swedish, I'm a native Swedish speaker, and the word for book is bok, but the plural of book is böcker, which makes no sense. I can't explain to you like why that happens. I can't explain any rule there. I just know it, right? The same thing applies with native Spanish speakers. They can't explain the why. Now, why is that important? If Spanish is only what and where, why is the why important? Because when you know why something happens, then it makes sense to you. And when something makes sense, then you remember it better. Information is retained better when you connect the dots. For example, if I tell you, presentation is presentación in Spanish. That is one thing, right? That's one thing by itself. But if I told you that every single Asian word in English becomes acción in Spanish, you don't only know presentación, but you know every single Spanish Asian word. And then furthermore, if I explain to you why that happens, why is that rule occurring? Because of Latin roots. When that makes sense, when you realize, oh, okay, that makes sense, right? Because even in English, like even in French, they have presentación or something like that. And even in Swedish, we have presentation. There are Latin roots, even though English is a Germanic language. A lot of people say that they're visual learners or they learn like in different ways. In reality, no, everyone learns in the same way. Everyone learns by getting this aha moment, by getting this click in the brain. When things make sense. Explaining the why can be done in several ways. So some people get this click when it's explained verbally. Some people get it when it's explained with like a real life example. Either way, it is explaining the why. And when you explain the why, it makes sense. And when it makes sense, you retain the information better. That is the reason why language transfer worked so well. And a lot of most people I've seen that have gone fluent, they all got fluent in the way where they understood like why it happened. They understood why grammar rules happen, because that makes you be able to retain it longer and better. You don't actually need it, but it accentuates the process. And this is why native Spanish speakers can't actually explain and teach Spanish as effectively as someone who actually learned Spanish. And the takeaway here is that people who have to go from nothing to fluent, from zero to fluent, are way more qualified to teach you Spanish than any native teacher ever. Because teaching fundamentally is teaching your own experience. Right? You'd probably go to the jacked guy for gym advice, not the scrawny guy. Why? Because you can tell he has more experience and has actually gone through the things that you want to do and achieved the things that you want to achieve. Whereas, let's say you're like really scrawny and skinny, and then one of your friends 2 years later is like extremely ripped. Okay? And then compare that to someone who like the high school jock who like just had great testosterone genetics and like just built muscle very easily. You would probably ask your friend that was scrawny and then got jacked for advice, right? Because he knows what it is to be in your position and he has more experience in that endeavor. Whereas the tall jacked guy has always been tall and jacked and handsome, right? So you probably wouldn't ask him for that advice. Whereas if someone has been in the same position as you and then gone up, then he's more qualified to bring you up, right? Now, this is not to say that every single native Spanish speaker just doesn't know how to teach Spanish. Not at all. But what it does mean is that a lot of native speakers don't know the why, which is why they can't explain it as well, which is why when you're speaking with a Spanish teacher, they're just sort of correcting you a million times. Like I've seen many calls and it's just the teacher kind of correcting the student a million times, but then there's no explanation there, you know? If you want one-on-one coaching with me where I teach you Spanish and how to get fluent in Spanish the way I did, then check the description, and I hope this video helped you, bro, and stay humble.